Sir, this lounge is meant for actual buyers, the front desk associate said curtly, her tone clipped with disdain. Sitting quietly in the far corner of the dealership lobby, Walt Jennings, age 75, barely reacted. A former communications specialist from the U.S. Army, he waited, silently, patiently, for someone, anyone, to notice he was there. But no one did. Salespeople bustled by him like he was invisible, their polished shoes tapping past his worn boots without even a glance. Walt had served in the Korean conflict, managing battlefield transmissions that often meant the difference between life and death. These days, his life was slower, quieter. He lived alone in a modest duplex on the outskirts of Fairfield, spending his days repairing old ham radios and helping other veterans at the local American Legion post, guiding them through a maze of paperwork and forgotten promises. That morning, Walt's neighbor, Charlie, a retired trucker, offered him a lift. Walt had finally scraped together enough from savings and pension checks to afford a used vehicle. Not a showpiece, just something that could get him to the VA clinic and back safely in winter. He dressed as neatly as possible. Pressed flannel, tucked into faded denim, boots polished as best he could manage, and a hat that had seen better decades. Inside the showroom, fluorescent lights reflected off marble tile, and the air smelled of synthetic leather and corporate ambition. Walt walked in quietly and took a seat near the complimentary coffee machine. 5 salesmen stood in a circle, laughing over something on one of their phones. None of them looked up. He gave them polite nods as they passed, one after the other, but the response was always the same. Nothing. He might as well have been a potted plant in the corner. After what felt like an eternity, a young woman from reception finally approached. Her name tag sparkled, her nails gleamed, and her tone was flat. "As concrete. This section is reserved for customers, sir," she said, stressing the last word like it was a test he had failed. "I came to buy a car," Walt answered calmly, folding his wrinkled hands over his knees. She looked him over, from his worn-out jeans to his age-lined face, and sniffed. "Someone will be with you eventually," she muttered, then turned on her heels, heels that clacked like punctuation marks. 40 minutes passed. Walt didn't complain. He just sat there, as still and quiet as a field radio waiting for signal. He took out a small leather notebook from his breast pocket, its corners curled with age, and began sketching. Inside were diagrams, maps, call signs, and a quote from his old commanding officer. Every signal matters. In his wallet, he kept a photo. A black and white snapshot from 1972, him and his unit standing beside their commanding officer, Captain Leo Anderson. Faded and creased, that photo had traveled with him through decades of change. On the other side of the glass partition, 3 sharply dressed salesmen glanced his way, chuckling. "How long has that guy been camped out there?" one murmured. "Probably just here for free coffee," another laughed. "Think he can still drive? I mean, can he even see over the dash?" The receptionist joined them with a smirk. "We get these types once in a while," she said. "They wander in, take up space, and leave when they realize it's not a soup kitchen." Back in the service area, a younger salesman named Jake happened to catch the whole scene through the window. Something didn't sit right with him. There was a dignity in the way the old man waited, like he wasn't just loitering, but honoring. Some silent promise to himself. "You sure he's not here to buy?" Jake asked when he stepped back into the showroom. "Trust me," said the sales lead, smirking. "You don't close sales chasing ghosts." Jake looked back at Walt, who had now turned a page in his notebook and was carefully diagramming antenna patterns. Still waiting. Still silent. And then the doors burst open. Sunlight followed a tall man into the showroom. Broad shoulders, sharp suit, and a posture you couldn't teach in any civilian job. Leo Anderson, now Colonel Anderson, walked. And like the building was his. In many ways, it soon would be. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on Walt. Then, in a booming voice that cut through the background noise like a siren, he shouted, Sergeant Walt Jennings! Every head in the building turned. Phones stopped ringing. Conversations halted. The receptionist dropped her clipboard. Colonel Anderson marched across the marble floor and pulled Walt into a hug that could crush ribs. "Been trying to find you for months, old friend." "You know him?" the receptionist whispered. "Know him?" Anderson turned toward her, eyes hard. "This man once kept an entire platoon alive by relaying coordinates under fire. When I was hit, he carried me half a mile, bleeding, without ever letting go of the radio. So yes, I know him." One of the senior salesmen stammered forward. "Sir, we didn't realize—" "And that's exactly the problem," Anderson cut him off. "You never asked." Then he turned to the dealership manager, who had emerged from his office, pale and flustered. "Is this how your business treats veterans? By judging them based on their boots instead of their battles?" The manager fumbled an apology, adjusting his tie, but Anderson wasn't interested. He was already on the phone. The conversation was short, sharp, and private. 15 minutes later, 2 men in tailored suits walked in, portfolios in hand. They met quietly with the general manager. Whatever was said left the man visibly shaken. Anderson turned back to the stunned staff. "Let me make something clear," he said. "As of today, I own a majority stake in this dealership. This building, this team, it's under new leadership." Gasps rippled through the room. A salesman's coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered. "First order of business," Anderson continued. "Walt picks any vehicle he wants, on the house. It's not charity. It's recognition. It's respect." He paused, letting it sink in. "Second, everyone in this building will be retrained. Every customer gets dignity, or they're out. Simple." Jake stepped forward quietly. "Sir, I'd be honored to help Mr. Jennings find his car." Walt stood slowly, cracking a small smile. "Let's take a look then, son." As they walked together toward the pre-owned section, a silence hung in the air, broken only by whispered disbelief. By the end of the afternoon, the dealership was buzzing, but not with car deals. News of what had unfolded inside had already started spreading beyond the glass walls. Staff members who once scoffed at the old man were now whispering among themselves, trying to wrap their heads around what had just happened. Veteran ignored, former commander buys dealership, was already circulating across social media, posted by someone who had witnessed the dramatic turnaround from the coffee station. Military family groups picked it up first, then local news outlets. Within hours, the story went viral, shared under hashtags like "Respect Our Veterans" and "Silent Heroes." It hit a nerve. Across the country, thousands commented, not just on Walt's story, but on stories of their own, fathers, mothers, brothers, who'd served and been brushed aside in civilian life. Outside the building, the golden light of sunset cast a long shadow over the lot as Colonel Anderson and Walt stood quietly, side by side. Above them, workers were mounting a new sign, sleek, bold, and impossible to ignore. Jennings and Anderson Motors. Underneath, in smaller letters, built on brotherhood. Walt looked up at the letters, brow furrowed in disbelief. "Never thought I'd see my name on something like this," he said softly. "Neither did I," Anderson replied, watching the drill spark against the sign frame. "But some bonds, they're not just military, they're permanent." The next morning, Walt pulled into the lot behind the wheel of a brand new Ford truck, mid-range, practical, reliable. It wasn't flashy, but it ran like a dream. On the rear window, just below the brake light, was a subtle American flag decal. He parked in the same spot where he had been dropped off the day before. But this time, the moment he opened the door, every employee on the floor stood. Jake was the first to step forward, offering a fresh cup of coffee. "Cream and 1 sugar, right?" I asked around. Walt chuckled. Somebody's paying attention now. Behind them, the young receptionist who had once brushed him off now sat at a much smaller desk near the customer service wall. Her name tag still glittered, but now it read trainee. She gave Walt a respectful nod, eyes down, her cheeks tinged with humility. It wasn't forced. It wasn't performative. It was the look of someone who had learned something. As the day rolled on, customers came and went, but word had gotten out. A young Marine, maybe late 20s, with a faded camouflage jacket, approached Walt near the accessories counter. He hesitated for a second, then extended his hand. "Sir, I saw the story online. What you did back then and yesterday, it meant something. Thank you." Walt gave a small nod, placing a hand on the younger man's shoulder for just a second. "No voice unheard," he said quietly. That simple phrase, one he had carried from his service days, soon found a home on the wall behind reception. Bronze letters, backlit, right where the coffee machine used to be. Beneath it, a plaque, dedicated to those who served, waited, and were finally heard. Within a week, the dealership's entire tone shifted. The coffee machine was upgraded. A veteran's wall was installed, showcasing photos and stories submitted by staff and customers. Jake took the lead on a weekly discount program for military families. A section of the showroom was turned into a quiet lounge area with service branch flags hanging above. A small gesture, but one that meant the world to those who noticed. Even the skeptical staff members changed. The man who once joked about Walt's eyesight now held the door open for every senior customer. The sales manager, who had once sneered at charity cases, was the first to enroll in a customer relations workshop that Anderson had made mandatory. Colonel Anderson remained involved, not just as a name on a sign, but as a quiet force shaping the business from behind the scenes. Once a week he stopped by in person, not to check numbers, but to check on people. Walt came in every few days, not to buy anything, just to sit in the corner, his corner, with a warm drink and that same notebook. Sometimes he'd sketch. Other times he'd just sit and watch. The team had learned to stop asking why. Some men earned their quiet. One rainy Thursday afternoon, a high school field trip passed through the dealership as part of a local career day program. One of the kids, a shy freshman with oversized glasses, asked if the old man by the window was some kind of company mascot. Jake overheard and smiled. "He's more than that," he said. "He's the reason this place has a heart." The story never really faded. National networks covered it briefly. A documentary filmmaker reached out about turning the moment into a short piece, and while Anderson appreciated the attention, he turned down the big interviews. "This wasn't about a business move," he said. "It was about correcting a moment we all got wrong." But the best part? The quiet, consistent shift in people's minds. Veterans started walking in with a little more confidence. Staff members started listening more than they spoke. And community members dropped off thank you notes or old photos to pin on the wall. On a chilly November morning, Walt was leaving the lot when he saw someone familiar standing near the service entrance. It was the receptionist, now fully trained, now going by Megan, no longer just the girl at the desk. She approached him, awkward but sincere. "Mr. Jennings, I just wanted to say, I was wrong. I didn't see you that day." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You see me now." That was enough. That winter, the dealership held its first Veteran Appreciation Day. Free oil changes, hot meals, raffle tickets. Walt didn't like crowds, but he showed up. Anyway, he stood in the back, near the flagpole, hand on his chest during the anthem, and as the local choir sang, "God Bless America," he glanced up at the building he never meant to own, surrounded by people who had once walked past him like he didn't exist, and were now lined up to shake his hand. Jennings and Anderson Motors became more than a dealership. It became a lesson. A place that quietly reminded everyone who walked in that respect isn't something you earn with a wallet. It's something you owe to those who've already paid. And just inside the glass doors, above the lounge area, a single framed quote hung on the wall, right above Walt's favorite chair. "No voice unheard, no service forgotten."